derives an awful lot of economic growth, a massive amount, in fact, in 2019, from sheer immigration, the growth of our population. And so there are concerns when border closures slows that growth down materially, as it has appeared to do. But are we underrepresenting the return of folks coming to Canada and also those who are already here? What does it mean if we're undercounting our population in ways that might affect policymakers? Benjamin Tal is the Deputy Chief Economist at CIBC Capital Markets. He's been digging into this. And Benny, you've been looking at this for a long time. So what are you tracking? When you look at population in Canada, what do you think we're missing?
Yes, a lot of things, I think. A year ago, before COVID, when we were young and innocent, the two of us discussed the issue of returning citizens. And the issue was that with Trump, maybe we are seeing more Canadians living in the U.S. coming back, and clearly what's happening in Hong Kong. But we didn't know the numbers because, quite frankly, Stats Canada does not capture the number of people returning to Canada, Canadians coming back. They really do not distinguish between tourists and returning citizens. And that's an issue because let's see what's happening in Hong Kong. The Chinese government is now telling you maybe you cannot have dual citizenship. What does it mean? Maybe we are seeing already a wave of people coming back from Hong Kong to Canada without even knowing that. That's very, very important from many perspectives, especially real estate, if you think about it for a second. So I suggest that we are undercounting the number of returning citizens. The official numbers are suggesting that there are 300,000 Canadians living in Hong Kong. Those numbers are based on 2006 figures. If you do the adjustment, maybe the number is 400,000. So we're talking about a significant number that potentially can come back in a rate that we haven't seen before. That's interesting.
It's very interesting. And just to put some context on the undercounting of returning citizens from all destinations, not just Hong Kong, which could be, 100,000, you think it might be up to 60,000, Benjamin. That's a big discrepancy when you think about things like the real estate markets most directly affected by returning citizens. And I would think of sort of the urban condo markets, for instance, which are really sort of seen to be bolstered by that group. What are the implications of missing that many people on our on our census?
Yes, and we are missing more, I think, because it's not only returning citizens, but it's also non-permanent residents. And let's go through it very quickly. The official number suggests that, as you can see from this chart, the official number basically telling you that yes, the number of population growth was up by 200,000 in 2020, down from 500,000. But I suggest that the number is actually higher by about 100,000, 125, because one, we are undercounting returning citizens. We simply are unable to capture this inflow, and I think that the number is larger than perceived. And then you have non-permanent residents, especially students. We all know the story, but the official statistics capture the number of non-permanent residents that are outside Canada. They have a visa, a valid visa. They couldn't enter, so it's a decline because they are not here. What we are not capturing is the non-permanent residents with expired visa that are still here. They are here legally because the authorities extended their stay, but they are not being counted as non-permanent residents. So therefore, if you do the math, we're actually seeing an increase of about 65,000 non-permanent as opposed to a decline. And that's important because overall, it means that population growth is better than expected, focused on cities, and that's something to consider.
So when we think about how that, where that has the most direct impact, what comes to mind for you? What sectors would you watch, including when it comes to jobs? What's the sort of material effect of these people?
Yes, I think that the most significant factor, of course, is the real estate market. That's the most immediate issue. And if you think about it for a second, we know that the rental market is weak, but it's probably stronger than perceived because there is more demand for rental units, especially among students, that we are not capturing. So it could have been worse. So that's one implication of this. At the same time, demand for housing among returning citizens is probably stronger than perceived, explaining some of the trajectory that we are seeing in the housing market. So in the short term, the main impact really is on the housing market. And I think that we are seeing it between the lines.
I've looked at a few charts recently on our housing market relative to other large nations, kind of large G7 nations, and ours really looks out of whack in terms of the value of housing. This would help, I suppose, in some ways. Does the undercounting of population feed into a kind of a misrepresentation of how hot our market is, or do we set that aside and say no, it is still very highly valued?
Well, it's very difficult to say. I don't think it explains everything, but it's clearly a factor. There are the returning citizens that I think is a pure demand for housing that we are not capturing. And remember, we have the reverse brain drain story that is also a positive from a housing perspective. So yes, we are not capturing all of it. I don't think it explains a lot. Remember, interest rates is a very big story here. Pent-up demand is a big story here. And many other factors, including the fact that Canadian cities are still desirable by investors. So overall, I suggest that this is part of the puzzle. It's not the whole puzzle.
And how concerned are you when you look at the values of Canadian real estate? We've started to see some softening. We've talked about the condo market. The rental market has shown real shifts because of the last year of how we've all been living. But when I look at those charts, I do worry about, we know household indebtedness has been a problem for several years here. We've got this kind of overvaluation now creeping into markets that previously hadn't been touched, the kind of non-dense markets outside of the big urban centers. Is that going to be a calamity in waiting if we should see rates turn the other way?
Well, if rates go up tomorrow by 200 basis points, that will lead to a significant softening in the market. It's not going to happen. So the question is how sustainable this trend is. And I think it's sustainable. Clearly, we are in a double-dip recession now. The economy is shrinking. You will see the housing market slowing along the line of what we are seeing in the economy as a whole. But you don't see speculation in the system. You don't see 2016, 2017 type situation. It's really a more balanced market. The softness that we are seeing in the rental market is a very healthy softness. The adjustment we are seeing in the condo space in big cities is something that we expected, and it's healthy. And what you see in the low-rise segment of the market makes absolute sense, given the desire to live in bigger places. However, I suggest that after this softness, we will stabilize. I don't see a collapse in the housing market. Prices are high, and unfortunately, they will remain high even after COVID. That's the reality of the situation in the Canadian housing market until we fix the supply issue that is really impacting valuations in big cities.
All right, and just, Benny, jumping back to how we count our population growth, other than the housing market, and there would be jobs associated with that, what do you think policymakers should think most about if they realize that they're maybe undercounting our population? What does that mean for our governments?
Well, I think the most important thing is to count it right. So I think that we have to put more emphasis and resources into making sure that we capture those changes in a more accurate way. I do know that Stats Canada is updating methodologies, and I hope that in the future they will capture most of those missing people. But at this point, the number one issue is to really focus on measuring it, because if you don't know the data, you don't know what to do.
Benjamin Tal, always good to have you with us. Appreciate it. Benjamin Tal, Deputy Chief Economist at CIBC Capital Markets.